TIFU by accidentally starting a wildfire because I thought it would be a good idea to burn some old papers in my backyard. I've always been a pretty cautious person, never reckless, always trying to follow the rules. But that day, I decided to do something that was a little out of character. You see, I had a mountain of old paperwork piling up in my office, bills, tax documents, expired contracts, all that junk you never really want to shred because, frankly, it's just too much work. After weeks of staring at it in frustration, I had the brilliant idea to just burn it all. I thought it would be quick, efficient, and, frankly, a little fun. Nothing could go wrong, right? So, one afternoon, I gathered up the stack of papers, brought them outside to my backyard, and tossed them in the fire pit. It was a beautiful day, sunny, warm, with just a slight breeze. Perfect for a little backyard bonfire. I'd done it before, so I figured I knew what I was doing. I added a couple of twigs to get the fire started, and before long, the papers were crackling away. At first, everything was fine. The flames licked at the edges of the papers, and the smoke curled up into the air. I was content, standing there with a cold drink in hand, watching my life's clutter go up in smoke. I thought to myself, this is a solid life decision. I'm really adulting today. But then, the wind picked up. Just a little at first, so I barely noticed. It wasn't enough to worry about, or so I thought. I was still there, standing casually a few feet away, watching my paperwork turn to ash, when one paper caught the wind and spiraled up into the air. It was like watching a paper airplane soar, except this was no fun, no clever flight. It was the beginning of my downfall. The paper didn't just float harmlessly into the sky. No, it was carried directly into the dry grass along the edge of my backyard. Before I even had a chance to react, the wind picked up again, a gust of air that seemed to carry my little fire away with it. The paper hit the dry grass, and within seconds, the small patch of grass was ablaze. The flames grew fast, faster than I could have imagined, and I stood frozen for a moment, horrified at what I had just done. My heart started to pound, and I felt an overwhelming rush of panic. I should have grabbed the garden hose or the bucket of water I had nearby, but I was paralyzed, staring at the fire as it quickly spread. I ran to the fire pit, hoping to throw dirt on it or stomp it out with my shoes, but the wind had taken care of that. The fire wasn't just spreading to the grass now, it was starting to climb up the small wooden fence that separated my yard from the neighbors. My mind went into overdrive, and I suddenly realized the gravity of the situation. I ran to the shed and grabbed the hose, but when I turned it on, nothing came out. The hose was frozen. Apparently, I hadn't used it all winter, and the water in the pipe had frozen solid. Perfect timing, right? By this point, the fire was already licking at the neighbor's fence, and it wasn't going to stop anytime soon. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing I could think of. I called 911. The operator answered, and I tried to explain what had happened as quickly and calmly as I could, though my voice was shaking. There's a fire in my backyard. It's spreading quickly. Please send help. I could hear her typing and asking me questions, but it was all a blur at that point. I just kept staring at the fire, feeling completely out of control. I didn't have to wait long for the fire trucks to arrive, thankfully, they were close by. When they did, I was standing there, still in shock, as they jumped out of the trucks and began setting up hoses. I couldn't believe this was happening. My backyard, my stupid little paper fire, was now the scene of an emergency operation. The fire department worked fast, but the fire had spread so quickly that it had already scorched a portion of the neighbor's fence and started creeping into the trees near the woods behind our homes. The firefighters managed to contain it before it could get any worse, but it was close, so close that I felt like I might throw up from the stress. Once the fire was out, I was left standing there, covered in ash, watching the damage I'd caused. The firefighters came over and started asking me questions, making sure I wasn't injured and that everything was under control. I felt like such an idiot. I'd never been in a situation like this before, and all I could think was, what have I done? The neighbor whose fence had been burned wasn't home, but the fire department made sure to contact them and let them know what happened. I had to give them my insurance information, and while no one was hurt, I knew it wasn't going to be cheap to repair the damage. In the end, I had to pay for the neighbor's fence repairs, which were expensive, to say the least. But the real kicker? The wildfire I had started didn't just stop at my backyard. Because of the dry conditions and the wind, it spread to the surrounding area. The fire department had to call in additional units, and for a while, I was part of the talk of the town. The local news even picked up the story of the backyard bonfire gone wrong. All because of a simple, stupid decision to burn some old papers. I'm still mortified when I think about it. The whole thing could have been so much worse. I could have lost my home, my neighbor's home, or even worse, hurt someone. I'll never make that mistake again. If I had to do it over, I would have called a shredding service, or even used the fireplace indoors. Anything but starting a fire in the backyard with dry grass nearby. Now, whenever I see someone even thinking about lighting a fire outdoors, I can't help but feel a wave of anxiety. I still cringe at the thought of those flames dancing in the wind. So, yeah, I'm that guy now, the one who started a wildfire because he thought it would be fun to burn some paperwork. Great. TLDR, I thought it would be fun to burn some old papers in my backyard, but the wind carried the fire to the dry grass, spreading quickly and starting a wildfire that required a full fire department response and resulted in me paying for my neighbor's fence repairs. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with a home-cooked meal, only to nearly burn down the apartment building. So, this happened a couple of weeks ago, and I'm still trying to figure out how to get out of this mess. I, 26M, have been crushing on this girl, Mia, 24F, for a while now. We met a few months ago through mutual friends, and after a few casual hangouts, we started texting and talking more. I thought things were going well, and we'd started talking about doing something more date-like instead of just grabbing drinks or going out in groups. I'm a decent cook, or at least I thought I was. I've cooked for myself and a few friends before, and no one's ever complained. In fact, I've gotten some compliments. So, when I asked Mia out on a date, I decided to cook dinner for her at my place. I figured it would be something a little more personal, and it would show her that I'm thoughtful and can take care of myself. I spent days planning the meal, researching the perfect recipes, and buying fresh ingredients. I even bought a fancy bottle of wine that I knew she'd like. I asked her what kind she preferred a while back. It was going to be perfect. Now, I should have known better than to get too cocky about cooking. Sure, I can throw together a decent meal, but I'm no professional chef. But my brain told me, how hard can it be? Just follow the recipe and stay calm. I decided to go with something simple but impressive, a homemade lasagna with garlic bread and a salad. Nothing too fancy, but a hearty, comforting meal. I wanted everything to be just right. The day of the date, I was a little nervous but excited. I prepped everything in the morning so I wouldn't have to rush around when Mia was coming over. I even set the table all nice with candles because, I wanted it to look romantic. Everything was looking great, and I was feeling pretty confident. Mia was supposed to arrive around 7 p.m. At 6:30, I had everything in the oven, the garlic bread was already toasted, and the salad was in the fridge. I was getting everything ready, just waiting for her to show up. The lasagna was the last thing I had to bake, and I followed the recipe to the letter, layers of cheese, pasta, sauce, and more cheese. I made sure it was perfectly layered and evenly spread out. I slid it into the oven, set the timer for 45 minutes, and went to the living room to relax for a bit. But here's where the trouble started. I'd neglected the fact that my oven has been a little wonky lately. It heats unevenly, and sometimes it gets way too hot. I've noticed this before when I've used it to bake a frozen pizza, but I always figured it wasn't a huge deal, and I'd deal with it later. Well, turns out that later came at exactly the wrong time. Around 7:10 p.m., Mia texted me that she was on her way. I was excited but also feeling the pressure to have everything ready and perfect. I quickly walked to the kitchen to check on the lasagna, and that's when I smelled something burning. The lasagna was sitting in the oven, but instead of looking like a nice, golden brown casserole, it looked like something out of a post-apocalyptic cooking show. The top had turned into a charred, blackened crust, and it was bubbling like it was trying to escape from the pan. Panic set in. I opened the oven door to try to salvage it, and the smoke hit me like a brick wall. The kitchen was quickly filling with smoke, and I didn't know what to do. I turned off the oven, grabbed a towel, and tried to fan the smoke out, but it just kept getting worse. The smell was horrible, like burnt rubber mixed with something far worse. I immediately opened all the windows, turned on the exhaust fan, and ran around the apartment looking for a way to clear the smoke. But the more I moved around, the more I realized I had no plan. My apartment is in a building with about 20 units, and at this point, I wasn't even thinking about how this could escalate. I just wanted the smoke to go away. And then, of course, the smoke detector went off. I don't know if you've ever been in this situation, but there's something about the sound of a smoke detector that fills you with pure, unadulterated dread. The high-pitched beeping started, and I was frantically waving my arms around, trying to silence it. I grabbed a broom to reach the ceiling and swatted at the detector, but it wouldn't stop. At this point, Mia texted me, "Hey, I'm downstairs, should I come up?" I was literally choking on smoke in my own apartment, trying to stop a fire from turning my place into a barbecue, and I had to text her back. I managed to write, yeah, come up. Everything's fine, just a little, delay. I couldn't let her see what was happening. I was panicking so much that I didn't even think to take the lasagna out of the oven. Instead, I just left the oven door open, hoping the smoke would dissipate on its own. When Mia arrived, I greeted her with what I'm sure was a very forced, awkward smile. I tried to act like nothing was wrong, but the smell of burnt food and the still beeping smoke detector definitely gave the game away. "Hey. So, I'm just finishing up dinner," I said, sounding about as confident as a nervous high schooler giving a presentation on stage. Mia glanced around, clearly noticing the smoke still lingering in the air. "Is everything okay? It smells kinda burnt in here?" I tried to play it cool. "Oh, yeah. Just a minor setback. The lasagna is a little crispy, but it'll be fine. Just gotta cool it off a bit." I pointed to the burnt wreckage in the oven, not quite realizing how bad it really was. She raised an eyebrow. So, you're saying you cooked that?" I realized at that moment how ridiculous I must have looked. I had just ruined the whole dinner, and now I was trying to salvage some shred of dignity. I told her, "Let me just, make something else really quick." But she was incredibly kind about it, laughing and saying, "Honestly, I'm not here for the food, I'm here for you. And if you need a backup plan, there's a great pizza place nearby." I felt so relieved. We ended up ordering pizza, and the rest of the evening was really fun. We talked, laughed, and joked about my burnt offerings. But the lesson I learned here? Don't ever cook when you're trying to impress someone. Stick to something simple, and maybe take a good look at your appliances first. In the end, I didn't burn down the apartment building, but I did nearly ruin my chances of ever cooking for her again. TLDR, tried to impress my crush by cooking dinner, almost burned down my apartment and ended up ordering pizza. It all started when I decided that I was going to impress my crush, Sophie, with a homemade dinner. We'd been friends for a while, but I'd finally worked up the nerve to ask her out. After a few casual hangouts, I figured a dinner at my place would be a great idea. I'd read somewhere that cooking for someone was a surefire way to win their heart, so I thought I'd go all out. I don't really cook, like, at all. I can barely make a sandwich without somehow managing to screw it up, but I was determined. I spent days researching recipes, watching videos, and trying to teach myself how to cook. There was a whole smorgasbord of meals to choose from, but I wanted to impress her with something fancy, so I settled on a 3-course meal, a starter, a main course, and a dessert. Simple, right? For the starter, I went with a fancy French soup called vichyssoise, you know, that cold leek and potato soup that sounds sophisticated. I had no idea what I was doing. I followed the recipe closely, but things quickly went south. I didn't chop the potatoes evenly, and they ended up mushy in places and hard in others. The leeks were supposed to be sautéed, but I got distracted and left them in the pan too long. They burned. The soup looked like something a 5-year-old would make for their school project, not something a grown adult would serve at a dinner party. Then came the main course, beef Wellington. I don't even eat beef often, but I had seen Gordon Ramsay do it on TV, and I thought, if he can do it, so can I. Well, spoiler alert, I can't. I had no idea how to handle puff pastry, nor did I realize how delicate beef Wellington actually is. I accidentally left the beef in the oven for an extra 10 minutes while I frantically tried to figure out how to fold the pastry. When I finally pulled it out, the pastry was burnt on the outside and raw on the inside. The beef looked like it had been roasted to death. And for dessert, I went with something simple, chocolate lava cakes. It seemed foolproof, right? Wrong. I didn't realize that you had to grease the ramekins properly, so when I tried to unmold them, they just collapsed into a sad, puddly mess of chocolate and cake batter. I'm pretty sure I could have served them as a dessert and an art installation at the same time. Now, all of this was happening in the span of just a few hours, and Sophie was due to arrive in about 30 minutes. I was running around like a chicken with its head cut off, trying to salvage whatever I could. I tried to salvage the soup by adding more cream, but all it did was make it taste like salty mush. I attempted to rebake the beef Wellington, but it was too far gone. The lava cakes were beyond repair. At this point, I was sweating bullets. Sophie texted me that she was 10 minutes away. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by a war zone of failed ingredients, wondering how I had gotten myself into this mess. I considered just ordering pizza and pretending it was part of the plan, but no, I couldn't do that. I had to stick to the plan. I was already too deep in this catastrophe. I threw on my best I totally know what I'm doing face, cleaned up the kitchen as best as I could, and set the table. I even lit a few candles to make it look like I knew what ambience was. Sophie arrived, and I greeted her with a big smile and a "Hey, you're just in time," as I ushered her into the kitchen. She looked around at the candles and the table, which was set up pretty decently despite the chaos I'd caused in the kitchen. I tried to make small talk to distract her while I quickly brought out the first course. I served the vichyssoise in bowls, and Sophie took a sip. This is interesting," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, yeah, it's a French soup, you know? Vichyssoise, it's supposed to be cold," I added quickly, trying to salvage the situation. She gave me a polite smile and continued eating, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. I mentally cursed myself for choosing something so exotic instead of just making something normal like spaghetti or tacos. Next, I brought out the main course. The beef Wellington looked like it had been through a battle. It was lopsided, overcooked on one side, and raw on the other. I cut into it in front of her, revealing the sad truth of its condition. Wow, that's, well done. A little too well done," she said, trying her best to hide the look of concern. "Yeah, it's supposed to be like that," I said, my voice cracking. "It's supposed to be charred on the outside, but, you know, perfectly cooked on the inside." She nodded, but it was clear she was being polite. She pushed the plate around a little bit and took a small bite, then quickly reached for her glass of wine to wash it down. By the time I served the lava cakes, I could tell she was just trying to make the best of the situation. The cakes were a disaster, and Sophie looked at them, wide-eyed, as they collapsed onto the plate. So, I think the lava part might have gone rogue, I said, trying to sound casual. She chuckled nervously. It's fine, really. I'm just glad you made the effort. But that's when it hit me, she was being way too nice. She wasn't enjoying the meal at all. And honestly, at this point, I was too embarrassed to keep pretending like everything was fine. I was pretty sure she was just being polite because she didn't want to hurt my feelings. I couldn't take it anymore. I put my head in my hands and sighed deeply. Sophie, I'm really sorry. I thought I could cook, but I'm a complete disaster in the kitchen. This whole thing is just a giant mess. She looked at me, and after a pause, she burst out laughing. Not a "this is awkward" laugh, but a genuine, "this is hilarious" laugh. I looked up at her, a little surprised. I mean, honestly, I thought this was some sort of elaborate joke. Like, this is straight up chaotic, and I'm here for it. You just made my night. And just like that, the tension evaporated. She didn't care that the meal was a total failure. She appreciated the effort, and her laughter made me realize that maybe I'd been taking myself too seriously. We ended up laughing for the rest of the evening, ordering takeout, and watching some cheesy movie that neither of us was really paying attention to. At the end of the night, I walked her to the door, and she gave me a hug. You know, she said, if you ever want to try cooking again, I'm down to help. But maybe we can just get pizza next time? I agreed wholeheartedly, and to my surprise, she actually kissed me on the cheek before leaving. Apparently, disaster in the kitchen wasn't a deal-breaker after all. In the end, I didn't get the picture-perfect date I was hoping for, but I did learn that trying too hard can sometimes backfire. And that a little humility, and a good sense of humor, can go a long way. And the moral of the story? Stick to pizza and leave the vichyssoise to the professionals. TIFU by trying to fix a broken toilet myself and flooding the entire house. So, let me preface this by saying that I am not, by any means, a handyman. I can barely assemble IKEA furniture without ending up with a couple of leftover screws that I'm pretty sure are important. But, when my toilet broke last weekend, I decided it was finally time to give it a go and fix it myself. You know, because YouTube exists and there's something about the idea of saving money that made me think, I got this. Spoiler alert, I did not got this. It all started when I noticed the toilet wouldn't stop running. You know the sound, the endless, high-pitched hum of water just flowing non-stop. The thing was, the handle wouldn't work properly either. You had to jiggle it just right for it to flush, and I was getting sick of playing this weird game of plumbing roulette every time nature called. I was tired of being embarrassed when guests used the bathroom and had to ask, do you mind if I just leave it running for a bit? I decided I would fix this myself. After a quick Google search on how to replace the inner workings of a toilet, I felt confident enough to give it a shot. I made a list of supplies: new fill valve, new flapper, adjustable wrench, and some rubber gloves. I felt like a certified plumber with that list in hand. No big deal, right? I headed to the local hardware store. I had to stop myself from buying a wrench that was way too big for the job just because it looked cool. After some wandering, I managed to find the plumbing section. I was looking for the parts one needed when I overheard two men talking in front of the toilet repair kits. One of them said, "You don't need a new fill valve, just clean the one you have." I thought, maybe that's easier. I was still skeptical, but decided to take their advice and bought the cleaning supplies instead of a whole new valve. The journey to this decision felt like I was making the most informed choice, like I was practically a seasoned pro at this point. This was going to be easy. When I got home, I suited up. By suited up, I mean I put on an old t-shirt and some shorts. I didn't bother with anything more formal because, well, I wasn't going to be dealing with anything too gross, right? I turned off the water supply to the toilet, which was step one in every DIY plumbing tutorial I had watched. I was feeling good about this. I unscrewed the top of the toilet tank and started draining the water. It was then that I realized that the tank's interior was actually pretty disgusting. I mean, it was covered in this weird lime scale and there was a little bit of gunk in there that I didn't even know how to identify. Still, I wasn't deterred. A good scrub, and it would be as good as new, right? I grabbed the cleaning supplies I'd bought, some descaling solution, a toilet brush, and a small sponge. I scrubbed the fill valve area, thinking I could just clean it up and everything would magically start working again. As I scrubbed away, I noticed some pieces of the old fill valve were falling apart. Huh, that's odd. I thought, well, maybe cleaning it will at least make it function for a little longer until I can replace it. That's when I realized that cleaning wasn't going to cut it. I figured I might as well take out the whole fill valve and replace it with the one I had been planning on buying. That's when I encountered my first issue. The screws that held the valve in place were old and rusted. I tried using my adjustable wrench, but it was no use. The rust had fused the screws to the metal housing, and they weren't budging. But I was determined. I tried for a good 45 minutes to loosen those screws. At this point, I was sweating and had dropped the wrench on the floor twice. I could feel the tension building. This was the point where I should have called in a professional, but I was too far gone to admit defeat. I decided, instead, to try something bold. I pulled out my trusty hammer. Yes, that's right, I attempted to tap the screws out with a hammer and a screwdriver. Why? Because I was convinced this was how plumbers did it. Spoiler, it's not. I gave the screws a few solid taps. Suddenly, one of them broke loose, but not in the way I expected. The valve cracked. Water started spilling out. No, not just spilling, gushing. Panicked, I turned to the shut-off valve to stop the water, but in my frantic state, I had somehow made the problem worse. The pipe connection wasn't fully tightened, and when I twisted the valve, it snapped off. More water poured out like a waterfall, flooding the bathroom floor, and the bathroom quickly became an unintentional swimming pool. I jumped back, slipping in the growing puddle of water, and I grabbed towels, lots of towels. I tried shoving them into the space under the tank to stop the water, but it didn't help. I ran to grab a bucket, and as I was running back, my foot caught on the edge of the towel pile, and I fell into the bathroom door, slamming it open. At this point, the house was basically flooded. I could hear my girlfriend coming down the stairs, asking what was going on. I shouted, "Nothing. Everything is fine," as I frantically tried to contain the mess. Spoiler, it wasn't fine. The water had now reached the hallway, and the floorboards started creaking. I didn't know what to do. I was in over my head. My girlfriend walked in, took one look at me drenched and surrounded by soggy towels, and said, "What did you do?" I didn't know how to explain that I had somehow taken a simple toilet repair and turned it into a full-scale plumbing disaster. She grabbed her phone, called a plumber, and the next 45 minutes were a blur of frantic mopping, apologizing, and awkwardly standing aside as the plumber arrived. The plumber fixed everything in 20 minutes. Apparently, the valve was so old and corroded that it wasn't salvageable, and my attempts to save a buck ended up costing us more in water damage than the original repair would have. The moral of the story is simple: never underestimate the difficulty of plumbing. Or, more specifically, never think you can replace a toilet fill valve without knowing what you're doing. The whole ordeal left me with a deeper respect for anyone who works in home repair. It also left me with a very embarrassed face, a couple $100 down the drain, literally, and a very dry sense of humor about my own incompetence. TLDR, tried to fix my toilet myself, ended up flooding the entire house, had to call a plumber to clean up the mess I made. Should have just called a professional in the first place. TIFU by accidentally sending my boss an NSFW meme I meant to send to my friend. So, this all started a couple of weeks ago, and I've been trying to figure out how I could possibly get through life without collapsing from embarrassment. It's one of those moments where I wish I could just disappear into thin air or find a time machine and reverse every decision I made for the past 48 hours. But of course, that's not how life works. Let me give you a little background first. I work as a marketing manager for a mid-sized company. It's a fairly chill office environment, but still, like any corporate job, there are boundaries you just don't cross. Everyone knows that you keep it professional, work hard, don't cross personal lines, and for God's sake, don't send your boss anything inappropriate. Pretty simple, right? I thought so too. So, the day starts like any other. I'm sitting at my desk, getting through the usual work tasks, emailing clients, brainstorming ideas, updating spreadsheets, etc. Nothing too out of the ordinary. Around mid-morning, my friend, Greg, who also works in a different department at the same company, sends me a message on Slack. Greg and I have an ongoing meme war. It's how we bond, sending the most absurd and hilarious memes to each other during work hours. It's innocent fun, and everyone knows it's a coping mechanism for the office grind. This particular meme that Greg sent me was a pretty raunchy one. It had a very elaborate caption about office life, and there was a picture of a cartoon character in a rather compromising situation. It wasn't obscene, per se, but it was definitely NSFW. Just the type of meme you'd laugh at when no one's around, not the kind you'd share at the office. Still, Greg and I had seen much worse, so I couldn't resist. I was ready to reply. Here's where things get complicated. I wasn't paying close attention to my phone when I clicked the reply button. Instead of responding in the usual Slack thread, I opened the wrong chat window. I had multiple chat windows open that morning because I was talking to several people in different channels, including my boss, let's call her Karen. Karen and I don't talk much outside of work-related matters, and when we do, it's usually professional and brief. The worst part? Karen had just texted me asking about a report I was supposed to send her. The notification had popped up right as I was getting ready to send Greg a response. I didn't double-check what window I was in and mistakenly hit the send button on Karen's chat. In other words, I sent her the meme. The exact raunchy, NSFW meme that Greg sent me just a few minutes earlier. The second I hit send, I froze. My heart sank into my stomach, and I was filled with pure, unfiltered panic. My brain started doing mental gymnastics. Did I really just send this to Karen? I quickly opened the chat window, hoping against hope that it was some kind of glitch or mistake. But no. There it was. The meme. The one with the inappropriate caption and the cartoon character in a compromising position, staring back at me like some cruel joke. I immediately started typing out an apology, hoping I could salvage the situation, but no words came out. How do you even begin to apologize for that? Hey, sorry about that, I meant to send it to my friend Greg, not you. Yeah, that wasn't going to sound convincing. It was one of those situations where no matter what you said, it would be too awkward to recover from. I quickly called Greg to tell him what had just happened, but of course, he didn't pick up. It wasn't his fault, but I needed some kind of support right now, someone who could laugh at my misery and maybe help me come up with a plan to make things right. After a few long seconds of staring at the meme on Karen's chat, I finally decided I had no choice but to apologize immediately. I composed the most professional-sounding apology I could muster. Hi Karen, I apologize for the inappropriate image I just sent you. I meant to send it to a friend in a personal chat. I deeply regret this mistake, and I'll make sure something like this doesn't happen again. I hit send, took a deep breath, and waited for her response. In the meantime, I kept checking my phone, my computer, the office door. Basically, I was on high alert, waiting for the inevitable awkward conversation. My entire body was shaking. Every possible bad scenario ran through my mind. Was she going to fire me? Was I going to be suspended? Would she just ignore it and pretend it never happened, and then silently judge me forever? There were so many possible outcomes, and none of them were good. It felt like hours passed before Karen finally responded. I could see the 3 little dots on the screen as she typed. My heart was pounding in my ears, and my palms were sweaty. Finally, the response came through. Thanks for the apology, / my name. I appreciate the clarification. I'll just pretend I didn't see that. Let's just keep things professional from now on, please. I nearly collapsed in relief. Karen was definitely not pleased, but she wasn't blowing it out of proportion. I took her response as the best-case scenario. I had dodged the worst of it, but I knew things would never be the same between us. From that moment on, every email, every meeting, every interaction felt awkward. I couldn't help but think she was judging me, silently imagining that meme in her head. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking on eggshells around her. Every time I sent an email, I triple-checked the content. Every time we had a conversation, I wondered if she was secretly picturing that meme in her mind. It was just too much to deal with. And Greg? Well, he eventually called me back, laughing his ass off at the situation. He kept telling me how funny it was, but I didn't share his enthusiasm. I asked him to send me memes that were work-appropriate for the foreseeable future, and he agreed, at least, until I'm no longer under the microscope. In the end, I learned a couple of things. 1. Never mix work and personal communication, and 2. If you're going to send memes in the workplace, make sure you're in the right chat window first. Also, always triple-check before hitting send, especially when your boss is involved. Moral of the story, memes are a dangerous game, and I will never forget the day I accidentally sent one to my boss. My life might never be the same again, but at least I have a story to tell. So, to all of you out there, be careful with your phone and your chat windows, because one slip-up, and you might find yourself in a nightmare you can't escape from. TIFU by trying to impress my girlfriend with an elaborate surprise dinner, and setting my kitchen on fire. I had been dating my girlfriend, Emily, for about 6 months when I decided I wanted to do something special for her. It wasn't our anniversary, nor was it any specific celebration, but I just wanted to show her how much I cared. She's the type of person who loves little surprises and thoughtful gestures, and I thought this could be my moment to win some serious boyfriend points. I don't exactly have a lot of culinary skills, but I figured with a bit of preparation, I could pull off a beautiful homemade dinner. The plan was simple. I would make her favorite meal, set up a cozy dining area with candles, and have a romantic evening ready when she arrived at my place. I had never cooked a full dinner from scratch before, but how hard could it be, right? I had seen enough cooking shows to think I was more than capable. I mean, it's just pasta and some chicken, how complicated could that be? I spent the entire afternoon shopping for ingredients. I picked up a bunch of fresh produce, some fancy herbs, and a couple of bottles of wine because, you know, what's dinner without a little wine? I even got one of those gourmet pre-made dessert kits. I'm not a baker, so that seemed like a smart choice. After all, my goal wasn't to be the next Gordon Ramsay, it was to create a nice atmosphere and maybe a decent meal. Once I got home, I started prepping. First, I tackled the chicken. I had no idea how long to cook it for or at what temperature, but I trusted my instincts. I thought, okay, I'll just season it with some salt, pepper, and garlic, what could go wrong? I placed it on a pan with some oil, cranked up the heat, and waited for that perfect golden brown finish. While the chicken was cooking, I got started on the pasta. I wasn't sure about the specifics of al dente versus soft, but I figured it would work itself out. I dropped the noodles in the pot and immediately regretted not reading the instructions. I didn't realize that the boiling water was splashing everywhere and burning my hand every time I stirred. But no big deal. I powered through. As the chicken was cooking, the smell started to fill the kitchen. It was definitely something. I'm not sure if it was good or bad, but it was strong enough to make me feel a bit proud. I looked over and noticed that the oil in the pan was getting a little smokier than I had anticipated. The heat seemed high, but I figured it'd be fine. After all, I'd seen people on TV cook things at extreme temperatures. I went back to stirring the pasta when I heard a slight sizzle, followed by a bit of popping. I didn't think much of it until I looked over and saw smoke beginning to rise from the pan. At first, I thought it was just steam, but then I noticed something worse. Flames were starting to appear along the edges of the chicken. I panicked. What should I do? I had no idea. I had seen people in cooking shows throw water on grease fires, so I figured I'd follow suit and grab the nearest thing, my half-filled bottle of wine. Without thinking, I threw the wine directly onto the pan. The flames erupted in a brief, intense fireball, and I was instantly covered in a mist of wine vapor. The fire didn't go out. In fact, it grew larger. My kitchen now looked like a set from a disaster movie. The next few moments were pure chaos. I grabbed a dish towel and tried to beat the flames out, but it wasn't working. The smoke was filling the air, and I could feel the heat coming from the pan, even from a few feet away. I thought about calling 911, but I didn't want to seem like I was overreacting. I mean, I had to be able to handle this on my own, right? In my panic, I rushed to the sink to grab some water, but before I could pour it onto the fire, I remembered something important. Water and oil don't mix. At all. If I threw the water onto the flames, I could make things 100 times worse. So, I set the water down and just stared at the growing fire, feeling completely useless. My kitchen, which had been a cozy space just minutes earlier, was now an inferno. I heard a loud knock at the door. It was Emily. Of course, it was exactly then that she showed up, right in the middle of my kitchen disaster. I looked at her through the smoke, and her face shifted from confusion to concern. "What's going on in here?" she asked, her voice panicked as she stepped inside. Just a little problem," I muttered. I'm sure my face was bright red with embarrassment, and I probably looked like I'd just been through a war zone. "I'll be fine. Just give me a second." Emily stepped forward, still unsure of what to do. The fire alarm in the kitchen had gone off, and it was now blaring in the background. I had no idea how to make it stop, and all I could do was open the windows to let the smoke out, which didn't help at all. She quickly grabbed her phone and called 911, explaining that there was a small kitchen fire. A few minutes later, a fire truck pulled up outside. I had never felt so defeated in my life. The firefighters arrived, looked at the situation, and immediately doused the pan with a fire extinguisher. They assured me that everything was fine, but I could see the barely concealed amusement on their faces. One of them looked at me and said, "Buddy, next time, just stick to takeout." After the fire was extinguished, the kitchen was a complete mess. There were charred remnants of chicken, splattered wine stains on the ceiling, and smoke residue everywhere. Emily, bless her heart, wasn't mad. She just shook her head and told me not to worry about it, that she was glad I was okay. But I could tell she was trying hard not to laugh at how much I had messed up. She ended up helping me clean up, and we ordered pizza instead of having the fancy homemade dinner I had envisioned. We laughed about it afterward, and honestly, it was one of the most memorable nights we'd had together. While I felt like a complete idiot, Emily's sense of humor and kindness made everything okay. I definitely learned my lesson. If I want to impress someone with a nice dinner, I should probably leave the cooking to the professionals. Or at least stick to the microwave. TLDR, tried to impress my girlfriend with a homemade dinner, caught my kitchen on fire, and ended up calling the fire department. We ate pizza instead. Never cooking again. TIFU by accidentally getting my entire family kicked out of a wedding. This happened a few months ago, and I still can't believe how badly it all went down. I thought weddings were supposed to be beautiful celebrations, but I unintentionally turned my cousin's big day into a total disaster. Let me start from the beginning. My cousin, Karen, had been planning her wedding for almost 2 years. She had her heart set on an upscale venue, a stunning old mansion with an elegant garden. The wedding was going to be a big deal with all the bells and whistles, the fancy dress, gourmet food, live music, the works. And as someone who's not really into big celebrations, I was already feeling a bit out of my comfort zone. But Karen's family is very traditional, and my mom was very excited for me to go and represent the family. So, despite my mild anxiety about weddings, I reluctantly RSVP'd yes. The ceremony itself was beautiful. I won't lie, it was a bit over the top for my tastes, but everything seemed to go smoothly. My cousin walked down the aisle in this jaw-dropping, off-the-shoulder gown, and her fiancé looked like he had just stepped out of a magazine. They exchanged vows, kissed, and everyone clapped. It was what you'd expect from a wedding of this magnitude, elegant, expensive, and a little bit over the top. But hey, it was her day, right? The trouble started during the reception. My mom, my sister, and I had been seated at a table near the back, a little bit away from the main action. I don't know if that was by design or just random seating, but I was thankful for the quiet. Karen's family tends to be loud and boisterous, and I didn't feel like being right in the middle of all the chaos. So we're sitting there, minding our own business, when my sister, who had recently gotten into organic health food, leaned over and whispered to me that she wasn't feeling well. She said she was going to step outside for some fresh air. I nodded and told her to be careful and to come back soon. Not long after she left, I heard someone mention that the hors d'oeuvres were being brought out, stuff like little sliders, shrimp cocktails, mini quiches. I was starving, and the idea of those tiny treats was enough to get me to my feet and head over to the buffet table. Now, the thing you have to know is that my mom is a little, enthusiastic when it comes to making sure she gets her money's worth. So when she saw the food coming out, her eyes practically lit up. She quickly pulled me over to the buffet, and we grabbed a couple of plates. Now, I didn't think it was a big deal. I was just grabbing some food, chatting with my mom, and trying to stay out of the spotlight. But here's where I made the mistake. I didn't realize that the food being served wasn't for everyone, it was specifically for the wedding party and the close family. As I was helping myself to the mini quiches, I heard someone behind me clear their throat. I turned around and saw the wedding coordinator, a woman who looked like she had been trained to make people feel guilty with just a look. She gave me a sharp smile and said, "Excuse me, but those are for the bride and groom's guests only." I froze for a moment. I had never been in a situation like this before. I wasn't trying to steal food from the bride. I was just hungry and didn't realize what I was doing was wrong. So, I apologized and quickly grabbed a smaller plate, thinking everything would be fine. But as I was walking back to my table, I realized that the situation was a bit bigger than I had thought. Karen's aunt, who had been sitting at the same table as me, whispered to another relative, and I overheard them discussing how I had helped myself to the VIP food. At this point, I was starting to feel uncomfortable. I thought the whole thing was over, but it wasn't. I don't know if someone complained about the food or if the wedding coordinator thought I was trying to sabotage the event, but somehow, word started getting around that I was trying to steal the bride's food. It became the talk of the reception. I overheard Karen's cousin, who had been sitting near the head table, gossiping with others about me. I tried to ignore the whispers, but then I noticed that the waiter was looking at me strangely. He asked if I wanted a drink, and when I said yes, he deliberately didn't refill my glass. I could see that people were side-eyeing me, and it was starting to get unbearable. My mom, bless her heart, didn't catch on to the tension at all. She was too busy gushing about how lovely everything was. Meanwhile, I was sinking into a pit of social anxiety. I tried to laugh it off, but I could feel the judgmental glances from the wedding party. And then the final straw came. At some point during the evening, Karen, my cousin, the bride, came over to our table with her new husband. She seemed to be in good spirits at first, until she took one look at me and froze. Then, without saying a word, she turned to the wedding coordinator, and they exchanged a few hushed words. It wasn't long before Karen was standing in front of my table, staring at me, her expression not what I expected. "Hey," she said, in that uncomfortable, forced tone you use when you're trying to be polite but you're also really upset, "I'm really sorry, but there's been a bit of a mix-up. We're going to need you and your family to leave." I thought she was joking at first, but she wasn't. The wedding coordinator stepped forward and gave me a sympathetic look. "We've had some issues with the food, and unfortunately, we can't have any more mistakes." "I'm sorry." My jaw hit the floor. I honestly thought she was messing with me at first, but then the realization hit, Karen was asking me and my family to leave the wedding. It wasn't a polite suggestion. It was a demand. We got kicked out of the wedding over a plate of shrimp cocktails. I don't even remember how we made it outside. My mom was in shock, my sister was still trying to figure out what had just happened, and I was in full-blown panic mode. We sat in the parking lot, staring at the building where everyone was inside, having a good time, probably gossiping about how that family had been booted from the reception. I still don't fully understand what went wrong. To this day, Karen hasn't reached out to me. I tried texting her a few times to apologize, but she's ignored me. The rest of the family is too embarrassed to talk about it, and I don't blame them. I haven't been invited to a wedding since. So yeah, I guess that's how I ended up ruining my cousin's wedding and getting my whole family kicked out. If you're ever at a wedding and you're not sure if you're supposed to be eating something, maybe just don't. Trust me. Moral of the story? Don't eat the wrong hors d'oeuvres. It could cost you a family member's wedding. So, I'm not exactly sure how to start this, but I guess I'll just dive right in. A few weeks ago, I decided to do something spontaneous, something I've never done before. I've always been a creature of habit, living a relatively predictable life, and I thought to myself, maybe it's time to break the mold a little bit. So, I signed up for a local cooking class. The class was themed around making an authentic Italian meal, and as someone who's a little too proud of their microwave skills, I thought it might be a fun and educational experience. Plus, I'd get to tell people I'm an expert in Italian cuisine, which would definitely be a good conversation starter at parties. The class was held in a quaint little culinary school about 20 minutes away from where I lived. It was one of those places that made you feel like you stepped into a cozy, rustic restaurant straight out of a movie. The kind where the smell of garlic and fresh bread lingers in the air. I arrived a little early, hoping to get settled and avoid any awkward interactions, but unfortunately, that didn't quite happen. I walked in, and the first thing I noticed was that most of the other attendees were couples. There I was, the only single person in a sea of pairs, and my inner anxiety started creeping up on me. But I was determined to stick it out. I mean, how bad could it really be, right? The instructor, Marco, who had the kind of energy that screamed I've been cooking since I was 5 and I know 500 different ways to make pasta, introduced himself, and we all sat down to go over the day's menu. We were going to be making a classic Italian meal, bruschetta, handmade pasta, chicken cacciatore, and a rich chocolate tiramisu for dessert. As Marco talked, I thought, okay, this is gonna be fine. I can handle this. I'd seen plenty of cooking shows, so I wasn't completely clueless. The class started with the bruschetta, and I was feeling pretty good about myself. I could chop tomatoes, drizzle some olive oil, and toast bread. It was simple, or at least that's what I thought. Everything was going smoothly until we moved on to the handmade pasta. Marco demonstrated how to mix the dough, roll it out, and cut it into perfect strips. But when it was my turn to try, I suddenly realized that pasta dough is not as easy to work with as it looks on TV. It was sticky, uneven, and my attempt at rolling it out was so lopsided that it looked more like a crumpled napkin than pasta. One of the couples at the station next to me noticed my struggle and, trying to be helpful, offered to assist. I, of course, didn't want to look incompetent, so I politely declined, saying, I got this. But in reality, I had no idea what I was doing. My dough was so sticky that I had to resort to using every available surface in the kitchen to try and get it to the right consistency. I ended up making an absolute mess of the station, knocking over a bowl of flour, spilling olive oil, and getting dough stuck to my hands, my clothes, and, embarrassingly, my hair. I looked like I had been attacked by a flour tornado. Marco noticed my chaos and came over to help. He gave me this sympathetic look as if he knew exactly what was going to happen next. You okay, my friend? He asked, trying not to laugh. I nodded, trying to act calm, but internally I was dying. He showed me the correct way to knead the dough, and after about 15 minutes of struggling, I finally had something that resembled actual pasta. But it was far from perfect, and it was a far cry from the smooth, flawless strips the couples were making at their stations. As if things couldn't get worse, the next task was to make the chicken cacciatore. This, I thought, would be my redemption. I had watched countless food tutorials on how to brown chicken and simmer it in a delicious sauce. Easy, right? Wrong. Somehow, I managed to scorch the chicken in the pan. Marco came over just in time to witness my attempt at salvaging the dish, but it was too late. The kitchen smelled like burnt chicken and regret. The couple next to me was now exchanging pitying glances, and I could feel their judgment like a weight on my shoulders. They even offered me some of their sauce, which I graciously accepted. In hindsight, they probably just didn't want me to ruin the entire meal. By the time we reached the dessert, the chocolate tiramisu, I was exhausted and defeated. I had no faith in my culinary skills left. But I tried to muster up some enthusiasm for the final round. Making tiramisu sounded easy enough. Mix the mascarpone, coffee, and cocoa, then layer it all together. That is until I made the tragic mistake of oversoaking the ladyfingers in coffee. They practically turned to mush as soon as I touched them. I tried to save it, but it was hopeless. What should have been a fluffy, delicate dessert turned into a soggy, sad mess. By now, I was convinced that the food gods hated me. At the end of the class, Marco, in his ever-encouraging way, told us all to gather around and admire our creations. As we looked over the dishes, I realized that my plate looked like something that would be served to a raccoon scavenging in a dumpster. The others, on the other hand, had beautifully presented plates of pasta, golden brown chicken, and perfectly layered tiramisu. It was like I had attended a different class entirely. Marco smiled at me, as if to say, well, you tried. To make matters worse, when we sat down to eat the meal we had prepared, I tasted a bite of the chicken cacciatore. It was so burnt that it tasted like charcoal. The pasta was clumpy, and the tiramisu, well, I wouldn't describe it as food, it was more like a sad, watery accident. I looked at my plate and then at the others' plates, feeling the sting of embarrassment. One of the couples offered me a bite of their tiramisu, which actually looked delicious, and I politely declined, not wanting to draw attention to the fact that my dessert resembled a sad pile of mush. When the class ended, I slipped out of there as quickly as I could, trying to avoid the awkward goodbyes. I walked back to my car feeling like the world's worst cook. All I wanted to do was go home and eat a frozen pizza. But I had to admit, despite the disaster of a meal, I had learned something. Cooking is not as easy as it looks, and sometimes, no matter how hard you try, things just don't turn out the way you expect. Still, I'm not giving up. Next time, I'm signing up for a class that specializes in microwave cooking. Hey, friends! If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. TIFU by accidentally sending my coworker a very inappropriate photo I took for my girlfriend. Let me set the stage. I'm a pretty average guy, mid-20s, working in an office job that mostly consists of endless email chains, spreadsheets, and meetings. Nothing too exciting. I have a girlfriend, let's call her Amy, who I've been dating for a couple of years now. She's amazing, beautiful, funny, and understanding. We both work full-time, and while we don't have much time to go on extravagant dates or anything, we make it work. So, a few weeks ago, Amy and I were talking one evening, and the conversation took a bit of a personal turn. We were just chatting, and she mentioned how she hadn't received a particularly exciting photo from me in a while. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the whole sexting thing, but we've been together long enough that it felt okay. It wasn't anything wild, just me trying to be a little spontaneous and send her something a bit more intimate to keep things fun. I took a picture, sent it to her, and that was that. No big deal. Here's where things went wrong. The next day, I'm at work, trying to get through the day, when I get a message from my boss. Let's call him Brad. He's in his late 40s, has been in the industry for decades, and is generally pretty chill. Nothing about him screams super intense, but I know when he needs something done, it's important. So when I see his name pop up on my phone, I immediately open the message, thinking he needs me to look at something or provide a quick update. Instead, I open it, and my face turns white as a ghost. There, in the message preview, is the very same photo I had just sent to Amy. I'm frozen. I can't process what I'm seeing. I check the contact name again, and yup, it's Brad. My brain starts to race, and I start panicking. How on earth did Brad get this? I quickly open the message in full, and sure enough, there it is. The photo I took, looking very much like it's intended for someone, but definitely not my boss. The worst part? Brad had actually responded with something like, "Hey, not sure what this is, but this definitely isn't a work-related image." The message had been sent through my work phone. I hadn't realized it at the time, but I must have opened Amy's message on my phone, and then, while I was half distracted, clicked on Brad's name when he sent me a quick follow-up email about a project we were working on. The phone had auto-filled the message window, and somehow, I had sent that inappropriate picture to Brad. I felt my blood pressure rise as I frantically tapped at my phone screen, trying to think of something to say. My first instinct was to just text Brad something like, "Sorry, wrong person," and hope he would chalk it up to a dumb mistake. But I couldn't just leave it like that. I had to explain myself. But how? I immediately started typing a message to Brad, something along the lines of, "Oh my God, I am so sorry, that wasn't meant for you. It was an accident, I swear." But then I realized that, in doing that, I would just look even more suspicious. There's no way he wouldn't think I was trying to cover something up. It's one thing to accidentally send a work-related document to the wrong person, but sending that? There was no coming back from that. I stared at my screen for a few minutes, hoping for some miracle. Maybe Brad would just delete the message and forget about it. Maybe he didn't actually look at it. Maybe it was a simple mistake that we could both laugh about later. But that would be too easy. I needed to fix this, and fast. I did what anyone in my situation would do. I panicked, and I called my best friend, Jeff, who works in IT at my company. He's the kind of guy who can fix pretty much anything, from computer glitches to people's egos, and I knew he'd know exactly what to do. "Dude, Jeff, you've got to help me," I said when he answered the phone. "I've made a huge mistake. I accidentally sent an inappropriate photo to Brad." Jeff, always calm under pressure, replied, "What do you mean, inappropriate? Like a meme or something?" "No," I said, feeling my face flush. "Like an actual, very inappropriate photo of me. Like, very inappropriate." There was a long pause on the other end, and then Jeff burst out laughing. "Oh, man. You've really done it now, huh? Stop laughing and help me," I practically begged. "What do I do? How do I fix this?" Jeff sighed and, after a moment of contemplation, said, "Look, it's too late now. You've gotta just own it, man. Maybe Brad will let it slide if you apologize and explain it was a mistake. But you've got to act fast." So, after a brief moment of hesitation, I took Jeff's advice. I sat down at my desk, took a deep breath, and typed out the most apologetic, self-deprecating message I could manage to Brad. Something like, "Hey Brad, I owe you a huge apology. That photo you received wasn't meant for you. It was a personal message meant for my girlfriend. I don't know how it happened, but I'm really sorry for the mix-up, and I completely understand if you're uncomfortable with it. I'll make sure this doesn't happen again." I hesitated before hitting send. What if this was the end of my career? What if Brad thought I was unprofessional and fired me on the spot? What if this was all just too much for him? But I had no choice. I hit send. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. I stared at my screen, waiting for the dreaded response. Would he fire me? Would he report me to HR? Would he tell everyone in the office about my blunder? Finally, Brad's response popped up. I braced myself. Hey, no worries. Happens to the best of us. Just make sure you double-check who you're sending stuff to next time. All good, but seriously, maybe don't send those kinds of pics from your work phone again. I almost fell out of my chair with relief. It wasn't ideal, but Brad was surprisingly cool about the whole thing. He didn't make a big deal out of it, and I got the feeling he might have been amused, even if he didn't admit it. But the important thing was that he didn't fire me, and he didn't make a huge scene out of it. I still don't know how exactly I managed to avoid a full-blown disaster, but I learned a valuable lesson that day. Always double-check who you're texting, especially if your phone is acting up. And maybe keep the intimate photos to your personal devices, away from anything related to work. So yeah, that was my TIFU. Now, every time I look at Brad, I can't help but cringe a little bit, but at least I still have my job. So, it all started about 6 months ago. My friend and I decided to take a road trip to a beach town about 4 hours away from where we live. We're both in our late 20s, and after a particularly stressful few weeks at work, we figured it was the perfect opportunity to relax, get away from the city, and have some fun. We had no real plans, other than to just enjoy ourselves and take in the sights. The drive was going fine until we hit the outskirts of the town. We were following the GPS directions, which led us down this narrow, winding road through the woods. It felt a little odd, but we didn't think much of it. After all, GPS is usually pretty accurate, right? I mean, we were going to a small town by the beach, so maybe it was just an off-the-beaten-path kind of place. After about 15 minutes, we arrived at what seemed to be a small lodge or cabin complex, isolated in the woods. We parked in front of a modest-looking wooden building, and a man in his 60s came out to greet us. He was wearing a flannel shirt and a big smile, which made us feel a little more at ease. He introduced himself as Jim and mentioned he'd be our host for the weekend. We exchanged pleasantries, and after some small talk, he led us inside. Now, here's where things start to get weird. Jim's place was much bigger inside than it looked on the outside. The main lobby area was dimly lit, with walls lined with old hunting trophies and mounted fish. The smell of wood and something else I couldn't quite place hung in the air. The place had that musty, abandoned quality to it, which, I'll admit, gave me a bad vibe from the start. But, we were already here, and it seemed like a harmless enough place. He gave us our keys and showed us to our room. It was on the second floor, at the very end of a long, narrow hallway. The room itself was decently sized, with a king-sized bed covered in a thick quilt. The furniture was outdated, but it looked clean. The view out the window showed more woods, but no beach. We found that a little strange, but again, we figured maybe it was just one of those quirky places that wasn't exactly on the beach but still close enough. We settled in and decided to go grab dinner in town. Jim told us there was a little diner about a mile down the road, and that it was one of the best places to eat. We thanked him and drove out, both of us still feeling a little off, but not enough to question things just yet. The diner was fine, nothing spectacular, but it did the job. Afterward, we decided to call it a night and head back to the lodge. When we got back, things took a turn for the worse. The lodge was eerily quiet. Jim was nowhere to be seen, but the door to the lobby was wide open. I thought it was strange, especially since it had been locked when we left. I glanced at my friend, and she gave me a nervous smile. We walked inside, and the first thing we noticed was that the lights were flickering. We shrugged it off, assuming it was just an old building with faulty wiring. But then things got really strange. As we walked up the stairs, we could hear what sounded like whispering. It was faint, but unmistakable. We paused at the top of the stairs and listened. The whispers seemed to be coming from behind one of the doors down the hallway. I felt my heart race a little. We were the only ones staying in the lodge, as far as we knew. Jim had mentioned that we'd have the place to ourselves for the weekend, so who could possibly be in one of the rooms? We stood there for a minute, deciding whether or not to check it out. Eventually, we both agreed it was probably just our minds playing tricks on us, so we made our way to our room. But as I was unlocking the door, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A small, folded piece of paper was wedged between the door and the frame. It wasn't there when we left earlier, and we hadn't seen anyone come down the hallway. I unfolded the note, which read, "Stay inside tonight. Don't go near the woods. He's still out there." I froze. My friend, looking over my shoulder, whispered, "What the hell does that mean?" Before I could answer, we heard footsteps. Heavy footsteps, coming up the stairs. We quickly shoved the note back into my pocket and turned to face the door. The footsteps were getting closer, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. My heart was racing. The door to our room slowly creaked open. It was Jim. He had a strange look on his face. He was smiling, but it was a little too wide, too forced. It looked like he hadn't slept in days. He glanced at both of us and said, "You two should head to bed early tonight. I'll be seeing you in the morning." There was something off about the way he said it. I couldn't place it, but it didn't feel right. We nodded awkwardly and went inside, locking the door behind us. I sat on the bed, staring at the note in my hand. My friend, visibly shaken, was pacing back and forth. "What the hell is going on?" she asked. "I don't know," I said, my mind racing. "But I think we should leave. Right now." I grabbed my phone to check the GPS for directions back to town, but it was acting weird. The signal kept cutting in and out. Finally, when it did work, it showed that the nearest exit was several miles away, straight through the woods. There was no way I was going out there, especially with everything that had been happening. We decided to wait until morning. I don't know why, maybe it was fear, or maybe it was just the exhaustion of the whole situation, but I think we both felt that if we waited it out, everything would be okay. But we were wrong. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of a window opening. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the cold air that rushed in felt too deliberate. I turned over to look, and my stomach dropped when I saw the shadow of a figure standing in the doorway. "Jim." Before I could say anything, he whispered, "Don't go near the woods." And then he left. We were out of there within minutes. We didn't even pack our things. We ran to the car, drove as fast as we could, and didn't stop until we were miles away from the lodge. I still don't know what happened that night. I still don't know what Jim meant or who or what he was warning us about. But one thing's for sure, I will never, ever, stay in a place like that again. It all started a few months ago, back when I thought I had my life together. I had a stable job, a cozy apartment, and was in a steady relationship with someone I thought I could be with long term. My days were pretty routine: wake up, work, come home, and then relax. Nothing too wild, nothing too crazy. I figured I'd been playing it safe, but, as it turns out, that's exactly where I went wrong. So, I'm a pretty clean and organized person. I like everything in its place and can't stand clutter. One of my weekly rituals is to do a deep cleaning of my apartment on Sundays. It's my way of unwinding, and it gives me a sense of accomplishment. Last Sunday, I was particularly determined to make sure everything was perfect. I'd been really busy the previous weeks and hadn't had the time to do a full scrub down. I'd gotten a little slack on my usual standards, but I was ready to fix that. I spent most of the morning clearing out the junk that had accumulated in my living room. Then, I got into the kitchen, which, let me tell you, had become a battleground for my cooking mishaps. I'm not a terrible cook, but I'm not exactly gourmet chef material either. I decided it was finally time to tackle the fridge. It was like an archaeological dig of old leftovers, half-eaten takeout, and mystery food that had been sitting there for way too long. I had to throw a lot of stuff away, and I figured, no big deal. I'll just scrub everything down, and the place will be spotless. I had no idea this decision would spiral into the biggest disaster of my life. While I was cleaning out the fridge, I came across a bottle of chile sauce I'd bought a few weeks ago. It was one of those fancy, artisanal hot sauces I'd been excited to try but never really got around to using. I was feeling adventurous that day, so I decided to pour a little bit on some scrambled eggs for breakfast. In hindsight, this was the first mistake of the day. I wasn't prepared for how spicy this sauce was. I mean, I knew it was a hot sauce, but I didn't know it would basically melt my face off. After the first bite, my mouth was on fire. It was so intense that I couldn't stop drinking water, but it only made the burn worse. I didn't want to waste the eggs, so I powered through, hoping it would eventually subside. Spoiler alert, it didn't. I ended up having to scrape the whole meal into the trash, my face a mess of sweat and regret. In my heat-induced days, I forgot to wash my hands. Now, normally, I'm very diligent about washing my hands after handling spicy food, but for some reason, I just forgot. I went about my cleaning spree, wiping down countertops, organizing the pantry, and doing whatever else I could find to keep myself busy. My apartment was starting to look really good, and I was feeling accomplished. Fast forward a few hours, and my girlfriend, Rachel, came over to visit. She'd been at her own place all morning, catching up on some work, and was eager to relax. We made plans to watch a movie, and as she came in, I greeted her with a hug, a big, warm embrace. It's something we do all the time, but on this particular day, I made a huge mistake. Remember how I didn't wash my hands? Well, as I hugged Rachel, I accidentally brushed my fingers against her face. She winced immediately. "What's that on your face?" she asked, rubbing her cheek. I was confused for a second, but then it hit me, the chili sauce. I had unknowingly transferred a bit of the spice from my fingers onto her skin. Rachel, being the kind and patient person she is, didn't make a big deal out of it, but I could tell she was a little uncomfortable. I offered to grab her a damp towel to wipe it off, but she just shrugged and said it was fine. She must have been too polite to tell me it was burning, but I could see she was trying to hold it together. We sat down to watch the movie, but things took a turn when Rachel started looking more and more distressed. I noticed her rubbing her face frequently and shifting around in her seat. I asked if she was okay, and she said, "Yeah, I'm fine." But I could see the discomfort in her eyes. Then, about halfway through the movie, she excused herself to the bathroom. At first, I thought maybe she was just going to freshen up or fix her makeup, but after a few minutes, I heard her call my name from the bathroom. "Hey, can you come in here?" I rushed to the bathroom, thinking maybe she had accidentally dropped something, but when I opened the door, my heart sank. Rachel was standing in front of the mirror, her face completely red and blotchy. She was visibly upset and in pain, and I could see her eyes welling up with tears. "Okay, what's going on?" I asked, my voice full of concern. "I think your chili sauce, it's burning my skin," she said, almost on the verge of crying. "I can't get it off. It hurts so much." I stared at her for a moment, feeling like I'd just committed a huge mistake. I immediately rushed over to the sink and tried to help, splashing cold water on her face, but nothing was working. The chili sauce had clearly irritated her skin, and it wasn't going away. I felt completely useless. Rachel was starting to panic now, and I knew I had to act fast. I frantically Googled how to remove chili sauce from skin, and, of course, the internet gave me some less than helpful advice. But one site suggested using dairy products to neutralize the burn, so I grabbed a bottle of milk from the fridge and tried to gently dab it on her face. It didn't help much. Rachel wasn't having it anymore. She insisted on going home, which I understood, but I couldn't just let her leave in that state. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to get her into an Uber and sent her off to replace with a care package of aloe vera gel and cold compresses. She didn't say much during the ride, but I could see she was still in a lot of pain. The entire rest of the day was a blur. I cleaned up the kitchen, wallowing in guilt. I was a mess. I sent Rachel several texts apologizing profusely, but she didn't respond for hours. Eventually, she texted me back saying she was okay, but she was still feeling the burn and needed some time to cool off, literally and figuratively. It took me a week to really get back to normal with Rachel. She eventually forgave me, but I think there's a little part of her that will never quite look at me the same way. Whenever she's over now, she always makes sure I've washed my hands before giving me a hug. And to this day, I haven't touched that chili sauce again. So, yeah, lesson learned, spicy food plus not washing hands equals a major relationship crisis. Don't make my mistake, folks. TIFU by accidentally sending a text to my boss that was meant for my friend, and it went downhill from there. So, a little background, I'm in my mid-20s, working as a junior software developer at a mid-sized tech company. We're pretty chill, and the culture is relaxed, but there's always a lot of pressure to meet deadlines. I'm usually one of the people who stays late to finish things up, which I don't mind because I get to be in the office when it's quieter. I don't like the chaos of too many people around, and it gives me time to focus. Anyway, it all started a couple of days ago. It was around 10 p.m., and I was finishing up a major project that was due the next day. I'd been working on it non-stop for the past 10 hours and was starting to feel my brain turn into mush. As usual, I started scrolling through my phone for a quick break to keep my sanity. I texted my friend, Sam, who works in the marketing department. We talk about everything, work, memes, random stuff, pretty much anything that doesn't involve the actual work we're supposed to be doing. So, I'm sitting there, texting Sam about how much I hated the new update to our app and how I was absolutely certain it was going to make us miss the deadline. You know, just venting about the usual frustrations. The conversation is going pretty well, and Sam is offering up some pretty solid advice about how to handle the stress. Then, something bizarre happens. I get this nagging feeling that I'm missing something. A quick glance at my phone tells me that the typing bubble is still on. For some reason, I thought I had already sent my message to Sam, so I hit the send button quickly, assuming I was done. But when I check the screen, I realize, with horror, that I had accidentally sent the message to my boss instead of Sam. Now, I need to give you some context on my boss. His name is Mike. He's a decent guy, friendly, approachable, but very, very focused on results. He's a get it done or get out type of person. I had been working under him for a couple of years, and while we had a mostly cordial relationship, we'd never had a conversation about anything personal. So, imagine my panic when I see my message, which reads, this update is such crap, I swear it's going to ruin everything. We're gonna miss the deadline, and it's gonna be all their fault. Why does everything always suck? A part of me goes into denial mode, thinking maybe Mike wouldn't notice or that he wouldn't care. But I already know I'm in deep trouble. Mike isn't the type of guy to tolerate whining, especially not from employees who are still relatively new. I start typing a follow-up text, trying to salvage the situation. Sorry, that was meant for Sam. Just venting. Forget I said that. I'll get it done on time, don't worry. But before I can send it, I get a reply from Mike. Got it. Thanks for the update. I'll be keeping an eye on it. My stomach sinks. At this point, I'm frozen in place, realizing the damage has already been done. My boss is now fully aware that I'm frustrated with the project, and I just sent him a message that sounds like I'm just giving up on the whole thing. This isn't good. I panic, trying to think of some way to fix it. Maybe I can send a long email apologizing and saying it was just a momentary lapse in judgment? But the truth is, I don't even know where to start. And even if I did, I'm sure Mike would see through it. The next morning, I come into work early, hoping maybe everything will blow over. I walk in, and as soon as I set foot in the office, I see Mike talking to a colleague in the break room. He looks up, and for a brief second, we make eye contact. I can already tell that he's thinking about the text I sent him, and I feel a cold sweat on the back of my neck. I sit down at my desk and immediately dive into my project, hoping to bury myself in the work and avoid facing Mike. But then my phone buzzes. It's an email from Mike. Let's have a quick chat about your progress on the project. Come to my office when you get a chance. Great. Just great. I can feel my heart pounding. I go over the email in my head repeatedly. It's incredibly vague, but I know he's not asking for a chat because he wants to hear how great things are going. A few minutes later, I walk to Mike's office, trying to look calm, but I'm pretty sure I look like a deer in headlights. I knock, and he gestures for me to come in. He's sitting at his desk, looking at the screen, but he looks up when I enter. "Morning," he says. There's an awkward pause. "Have a seat." I sit down, and he just stares at me for a second. "Listen, about last night," he starts. I brace myself. Here it comes. "I understand that things can get frustrating, and I appreciate the honesty," he continues. "But it's important to keep a positive attitude, especially when you're working with a team. We all have bad days, but what matters is how we handle them." I'm sitting there, completely stunned. This isn't going the way I thought it would. I was expecting a scolding, maybe even a warning, but instead, Mike is being supportive. What is happening? I try to hold it together. Yeah, I know. I shouldn't have sent that message. I was just frustrated and I don't even know how to finish that sentence. He interrupts me before I can say anything else. I get it. I've been there too. But we all need to remember that it's a team effort. If we want to succeed, we need to stay focused and keep our emotions in check. I nod vigorously, relieved that he's not angry. Absolutely. I'll do better. He leans back in his chair. You're a great worker. Just keep pushing forward, and don't let the stress get to you. And with that, the conversation ends. I'm honestly in shock. It wasn't nearly as bad as I expected, and in fact, it was almost like a lesson in emotional intelligence from my boss. Afterward, I leave his office, feeling like I've dodged a bullet. However, things didn't end there. The rest of the day was spent with coworkers making passive-aggressive comments about how stressful the update is or how things might go wrong in the project. Turns out, Mike had shared my little emotional venting session with the team. Of course, they didn't mention the text, but it was clear that they all knew. To sum up, I definitely learned a few things. 1. Never, ever text your boss when you're stressed. 2. Always double-check who you're sending messages to. 3. Mike may be a hard ass, but he's not as unforgiving as I thought. Oh, and I guess Sam never did find out that I sent him a text intended for my boss. So there's that at least. TIFU by trying to impress my friends with a simple camping trip and almost getting us all stranded in the middle of nowhere. So, to set the scene, I've always been the adventure type of guy in my friend group. I'm the one who suggests spontaneous hikes, road trips, and the occasional camping trip. It's mostly fun, except when it's not. Last weekend, I decided to plan a camping trip to a place I'd read about online. It's a national forest about 4 hours from our city, known for being quiet, remote, and absolutely gorgeous. There's a small lake, some hiking trails, and it's relatively off the beaten path. Perfect, right? Well, it was supposed to be. I pitched the idea to my friends, and they were all in. To make it sound even better, I told them I'd take care of all the logistics. I had been camping a few times in my life, so I was confident in my ability to plan and execute a trip like this. I made a list of supplies: tent, sleeping bags, food, first aid kit, campfire equipment, water filters, everything, and started coordinating with everyone. I also figured we could make a little competition out of it. Who could build the best fire? Who could catch the biggest fish? You get the idea. This would be an epic weekend. We all met up at my apartment the morning of the trip. I'd borrowed a friend's old minivan to haul all the gear, and we packed up in a hurry. I was in charge of the maps and navigation, and it wasn't long before we were on our way. The drive was smooth at first, until we hit the outskirts of the forest. The main road started winding, and the GPS started getting more and more unreliable. Apparently, this place was so remote that there were barely any signals, which should have been my first clue that maybe I was biting off more than I could chew. But I kept going because I didn't want to seem like a failure in front of my friends. After about 3 hours, the road we were following started to look less like a legitimate highway and more like a dirt trail through the trees. The car was bumping around like crazy, but I thought we were close to the campsite. I was feeling pretty smug about how rugged this trip was going to be, so I didn't think much of it. My friends were kind of nervous, but I brushed it off, saying, "It's fine, we're almost there. Just hang in there for a few more miles." By the time we reached the supposed entrance to the camping area, it was already getting dark. The sun was setting, and I hadn't even thought to bring flashlights for any of us. This was mistake number 2. But I was convinced we'd make it before it got fully dark. I was wrong. We ended up on what could only be described as a glorified goat path, a narrow dirt trail that barely fit the van. The trees were closing in, and the ground was uneven. We were bouncing around so much that I started to wonder if we'd get stuck. But I didn't want to turn back and admit defeat. "We're fine," I kept repeating. "I know exactly where we're going." Well, spoiler alert, I didn't know where we were going. We eventually came to a halt in front of what looked like an old logging cabin. The place looked abandoned, but there was a fire pit outside, and I convinced myself it was meant for campers. I parked the car, and we started unloading everything. My friends were starting to get a little worried, but I told them that we'd just have to make the best of it. I had read a blog post about the place, and it said that primitive camping was part of the experience. Primitive meant no amenities, right? Well, I assumed that meant no bathrooms or showers, not no access to civilization at all. We set up the tent, got a fire going, after a few attempts, mind you, I'm not as good at this as I thought, and started cooking dinner. The whole time, there was this nagging feeling in the back of my mind, but I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was the creeping fear that the forest around us was way more desolate than I anticipated. Maybe it was the fact that we hadn't seen a single person or vehicle in hours. After dinner, we sat around the fire, telling stories and joking about how much of a disaster the whole thing was turning out to be. But as the night wore on, things started to feel a little off. There were odd noises in the woods, distant howls, branches cracking, the rustling of leaves. None of us were experts in nature sounds, but something didn't sit right. Around midnight, we were all in the tent, trying to sleep, when we heard something outside. At first, we thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but the sounds started getting closer, footsteps. And then, we heard whispers. That's when I started to panic. I know, it's probably just the wind or maybe some other campers, but it felt wrong. My friends were on edge too, and I could tell they were silently freaking out. I told them to stay calm and that everything was fine, but I'm not sure I believed myself. We huddled in the tent for a while, waiting for the noises to subside. At this point, I was regretting every decision I'd made. The thing is, I didn't know what to do. We were in the middle of nowhere, with no phone signal and no idea how to get back to civilization. The road we came in on wasn't a road, it was a trail that only a 4x4 vehicle could navigate. I had no clue how we were going to get out. By morning, the noises had stopped, but the anxiety was still there. We decided to pack up and leave, but as we got ready to head out, I realized that the van was stuck. The dirt trail had been too soft for a regular vehicle, and the wheels had sunk in. I tried everything, rocking the van, using branches as makeshift traction, even getting my friends to push, but nothing worked. I was now officially stranded. After a couple of hours of trying to dig the van out, I realized there was no way we were going to make it back without help. So, I did the only thing I could think of, I started walking, hoping to find someone who could help. I left my friends with the van, telling them I'd be back soon. It took me almost 5 hours to find a ranger station. When I finally explained the situation, the ranger looked at me like I was an idiot. He told me that I'd essentially driven us to one of the least accessible parts of the forest, and I'd have to wait for a recovery team to pull the van out. By the time we made it back to the campsite, it was already late afternoon. We got the van unstuck eventually, but we lost an entire day. And when we finally got back to the main road, everyone was tired, grumpy, and completely done with the trip. My friends all agreed that this was my worst camping idea yet, and I could tell they were secretly relieved to be heading home. So, yeah. I tried to impress my friends with an off-the-beaten-path camping trip, and it almost turned into a disaster. I learned a valuable lesson: just because it looks good on the internet doesn't mean it's a good idea in real life. Also, always bring a map. And a flashlight. And maybe a 4x4 vehicle. TLDR, planned a camping trip to a remote forest, drove a minivan down an unpaved trail, got stuck, and had to walk for hours to get help. Friends are never letting me plan another trip again. TIFU by thinking I could get away with not checking my work, so I work at a pretty well-known accounting firm. I've been here for a little over 2 years, and while I'm not exactly a rookie, I'm definitely not one of the senior guys either. I handle the bulk of the daily tasks, and when it's time for crunch periods, I take on extra work, which is fine by me. I've got a pretty good routine down, but things recently got complicated. A couple of weeks ago, one of the senior accountants got pulled into a high-profile project that required them to work with some major clients. In turn, I was asked to take on a bit more work than usual. One of these tasks was a large financial report for a tech company that had been doing some pretty aggressive acquisitions lately. The project wasn't overly difficult, but it was long, and the deadline was tight. No big deal, right? I've handled these types of things plenty of times before. So, I dug into it. The first couple of days were smooth. I was moving through the data, cross-referencing figures, and putting together the financial models. I felt confident I could wrap this thing up by the end of the week. But then, the dreaded things started piling up. Moment arrived. Emails kept flooding in, client meetings were scheduled, and there were additional requests from my team that required immediate attention. I was juggling a lot, but I figured I could power through it. What could go wrong, right? The problem started when I began entering some of the final data into the report on the third day of this marathon. I was getting a little tired, but I didn't think anything of it. The report was supposed to be sent out for final review by the next morning, so I rushed to wrap things up. At some point, I got caught up with an email and didn't check my numbers as thoroughly as I should have. You see, I've been trained to double-check everything, but in the moment, I thought, it's fine. I'm a pro, I've done this a million times. I exported the document, added the final notes, and sent it to my boss for review. Then, I promptly moved on to my next task because, well, that's just what you do when you're in the grind. I felt a little nervous about rushing things, but I thought my boss would catch any mistakes in the final review. After all, that's what they're there for, right? The next morning, I got a message from my boss asking me to join a Zoom call with a few higher-ups to discuss the report. My heart sank. I hadn't heard back about any revisions, so I figured things were going smoothly. But nope. As soon as I joined the meeting, I could see the tension in the room. They had opened the report, and the first thing that jumped out was a glaring mistake in the financial analysis. Apparently, I had miscalculated a key metric. A simple error, but one that made the entire report look wildly off. Instead of reflecting a steady upward trajectory in revenue growth, the report showed that the company was bleeding money like a sinking ship. It was so bad that the tech company's executives could have pulled out their stock in panic if they saw the numbers. I froze. The awkward silence stretched on for a few seconds before one of the higher-ups spoke up, asking me what happened. I tried to explain that I had been rushed and that I thought everything was fine. They were not impressed. To make matters worse, my boss wasn't giving me the usual "don't worry, we'll fix it" kind of support. Instead, they just nodded silently, their face a mask of professional disappointment. I quickly opened the file on my screen and tried to fix the error. I'm sure my panic was palpable. I saw the mistake right away. Some formula had been entered incorrectly, and it was throwing off the entire financial model. With a few quick adjustments, I fixed it, but the damage was done. The higher-ups had already seen the initial report, and the trust in my ability to handle such a crucial task had been severely shaken. When the call ended, I was left with a sinking feeling. I knew I had screwed up. Worse yet, this wasn't just a small misstep. This was the kind of mistake that could ruin relationships with clients, cause delays, and tarnish the firm's reputation. My boss pulled me aside afterward and gave me a constructive lecture about attention to detail, deadlines, and the importance of checking my work. The next few days were full of awkward conversations with team members, some of whom had witnessed the fallout from the report. I had to redo the entire report from scratch and resubmit it with apologies. Luckily, the tech company didn't seem to notice the error before the corrected version was sent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had almost caused a huge disaster. I've learned a valuable lesson: never think you're too experienced to double-check your work, no matter how routine the task might seem. And now, I'm the guy who has to be extra cautious about even the smallest details. Every number, every formula, checked and rechecked. I never want to be in that position again, and the humiliation is something I'll probably never forget. So, if you're ever in a rush and think you can get away with skipping the final checks, don't. Trust me, the consequences are not worth it. At least my boss still trusts me with work. But I'll be taking my sweet time going through every spreadsheet from now on. You learn the hard way, I guess. TLDR, I rushed through a big report, skipped double-checking the numbers, and made a huge mistake that could have ruined a client's trust in the company. Learned the importance of checking your work, no matter how experienced you are. TIFU by accidentally breaking up with my girlfriend during a surprise date I planned for her. So, this all started when I decided to plan the perfect surprise date for my girlfriend, Emma. We had been dating for about 9 months, and I thought it was time to step things up. Emma had been a little stressed with work lately, and I wanted to do something special to cheer her up and remind her how much she meant to me. I figured a surprise dinner would be nice, but I didn't want to just go to a regular restaurant, so I went all out with this elaborate plan. I'm not exactly the most spontaneous person in the world. I tend to overthink everything, and I had been planning this surprise for weeks. I arranged for a private chef to come to my apartment and cook dinner. The menu was fancy: lobster bisque, steak, and molten chocolate cake for dessert. I also made sure to decorate the place with candles, fairy lights, and fresh flowers to make it feel romantic. I even got her a gift: a silver necklace with a pendant that had our initials engraved on it. I was feeling pretty proud of myself. The day of the surprise, I texted Emma early in the morning to make sure she didn't have any major work things scheduled. She replied that she had a big presentation at work but would be done by 6 p.m., so I knew that would give me plenty of time to set everything up. I spent the whole afternoon cleaning, setting up, and rehearsing what I was going to say. I even tried to calm myself down by watching a few cooking videos to make sure I didn't burn anything when the chef arrived. I was nervous but excited. I wanted everything to be perfect. Around 6 p.m., Emma texted me saying she was on her way. I was ecstatic. I quickly freshened up, put on my nicest shirt, and lit the candles. The chef had already arrived and was busy preparing the meal in the kitchen. Everything was going according to plan, or so I thought. When Emma knocked on the door, I opened it with a huge smile on my face, and I could see the shock in her eyes as she looked around. I stepped aside and invited her in. She looked at the setup, then at me, then back at the setup, and finally asked, "What's all this?" I had a little nervous laugh and said, "It's a surprise. I've been planning this for weeks. I wanted to do something special for you." Emma's eyes softened, and she smiled, which made me feel like all my efforts were paying off. "This is really sweet," she said. "But why?" "You know, I'm not really big on surprises." I could feel a twinge of discomfort, but I shrugged it off, thinking she was just being modest. After all, she had been a little stressed lately, so I figured she was just surprised by the effort. "I know, but I just wanted to do something nice." "You deserve it." She nodded, though she still seemed a little off. We walked into the living room, where I had set up a cozy little table with a bottle of wine, and the chef was finishing up the last touches on dinner. The lighting was soft, and everything felt intimate and cozy. As we sat down, I could tell Emma was still a little uneasy. She didn't seem as excited as I thought she would be. We started with the lobster bisque, and as she tasted it, she said, "Wow, this is really good." I felt a wave of relief. At least the food was up to par. But then, she set her spoon down and sighed. I asked, "Is everything okay?" Emma hesitated for a moment, then said, "Yeah, it's fine. I don't know, I've been thinking a lot lately, and I think we need to talk." My heart dropped. I felt like I had just been slapped in the face. The nerves I had pushed down all night came flooding back. My mind immediately went into overdrive, running through everything I had done that could have led to this moment. Was she breaking up with me? Was there something wrong with our relationship that I hadn't noticed? Talk about what? I asked, trying to sound calm but failing miserably. Emma looked at me, and there was a lot of uncertainty in her eyes. I don't know how to say this, but I think we need a break. A break. Those two words hit me like a freight train. I froze. My brain couldn't process it. A break? From what? From each other, she said quietly. I've been feeling like maybe we're not in the same place anymore. I don't know if we're right for each other. I was completely blindsided. Everything I had been planning, everything I had hoped for in that moment, came crashing down. The words felt like a punch to the gut. I had no idea what to say. I tried to keep it together, but I could feel the tears threatening to spill. But, we've been together for almost a year. We've been happy, right? I asked, my voice cracking. Why now? Emma looked uncomfortable, like she didn't know how to answer that. She shifted in her seat, fiddling with her wine glass. I think we've just grown apart. I've been feeling it for a while. I don't want to hurt you, but I think it's best for both of us if we step back and reevaluate. At this point, I didn't know what to do. I wanted to scream, to beg her not to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I just nodded, trying to process everything. The meal, the flowers, the necklace, everything felt pointless now. I had set up this entire night, this grand gesture, for something that was falling apart right in front of me. I tried to salvage what was left of the evening. I awkwardly handed her the gift I had gotten her, the necklace with our initials engraved on it. She took it, her expression softening for a second, but then she just handed it back to me. I don't think I can accept this, she said quietly. The words stung. I had wanted to give her something meaningful, something that symbolized our relationship, but in that moment, it felt like a reminder of everything that was falling apart. The night ended in an awkward silence. I walked her to the door, and she gave me a quick hug before leaving. I watched her go, the weight of the situation sinking in. It wasn't until I closed the door behind me that I realized just how badly I had messed up. Looking back now, I realize I made a huge mistake. I tried to fix something that wasn't broken by putting all my energy into an elaborate surprise, but in doing so, I ignored the subtle signs that Emma had been feeling unsure about us for a while. I thought the grand gesture would fix everything, but it only made things worse. The worst part? I never got to eat the lobster bisque. And now, every time I see a silver necklace, I think about how I unknowingly ended my relationship on a night I had planned to be perfect. So yeah, TIFU by trying to plan the perfect surprise and accidentally ending my relationship. It's been a couple of weeks now, and I'm still not sure how to feel about any of it. But I guess I learned that sometimes, no matter how much you plan, you can't control everything. Especially when it comes to relationships. TIFU by accidentally insulting my girlfriend's mom and causing a family drama that almost ended my relationship. So, this happened last weekend, and I'm still trying to figure out how I could have been so stupid. I'm a 26-year-old guy, and I've been dating my girlfriend, Emily, for almost 2 years now. She's amazing, smart, funny, and kind. Her family, though? Well, that's a different story. I've met her parents a few times, but we've never really spent an extended amount of time together. Her mom, in particular, has always been a bit intimidating. She's very opinionated, can be a little overbearing, and, to be honest, I've always felt a little nervous around her. Last weekend, Emily invited me to her family's annual get-together. It's this big thing, like a family reunion but smaller, with all of her extended family and a few close friends. I had been dreading it a bit because I don't know many of the people, and her mom can be a little intense. But I knew it was important to Emily, so I put on my best I'm totally confident and social mask and agreed to go. The day started off fine enough. The food was great, people were friendly, and I was doing my best to make small talk and not look like a nervous wreck. But then, as the day went on, I found myself in a conversation with Emily's mom, Carol. Now, I need to give you some background here. Carol is one of those people who always has something to say about everything. She's an expert on everything from interior design to politics, and if you don't agree with her, you're in for a lecture. I had been doing my best to avoid any controversial topics all day, but somehow, Carol cornered me in the kitchen while I was getting a drink. It started innocently enough. She was asking how I was enjoying the party and if I liked the food. I was just trying to be polite, so I told her that everything was great and that the mashed potatoes were especially delicious. Well, she said, I have to admit, I did put a little more butter in this year. I was trying to be healthier, but I just couldn't resist. I chuckled and told her that I didn't mind the extra butter at all, but then it took a strange turn. She went off on this whole rant about how her daughter, Emily, had been encouraging her to eat healthier, and how Emily is always lecturing me about my diet. Now, I don't know why I said what I did next, but I was trying to be funny and lighten the mood, so I said, well, I think Emily just wants you to be around for as long as possible. You're kind of like the family matriarch, right? Everyone looks up to you. She didn't laugh. In fact, she stared at me with this strange look, like I'd just slapped her in the face. I thought I had said something nice, but instead, she looked hurt. I don't need anyone telling me what to do, she said sharply, her voice tightening. I've been taking care of myself for years, and I don't appreciate being treated like I can't make my own decisions. Now, in my panic, I tried to backpedal and smooth things over, but it only made it worse. Oh no, I didn't mean that at all. I just meant that it's sweet of Emily to care so much about you. I know she loves you a lot. She cut me off. I don't need your approval, and I don't need to be treated like some fragile old lady just because I'm getting older. Emily doesn't know what it's like to be an adult and make her own choices. She thinks she knows better, but she's just a kid. I was completely caught off guard. I'd accidentally stumbled into a minefield of family issues that I had no idea even existed. I tried to change the subject and steer the conversation in a different direction, but the damage had already been done. Carol was visibly upset, and I could tell that something was wrong, but I didn't know how to fix it. She walked away, leaving me standing there, feeling like an idiot. The rest of the day was a blur of awkward interactions. Every time I tried to talk to someone, I could feel eyes on me. Emily's cousins kept giving me these weird looks, and Emily herself seemed distracted, constantly texting on her phone. I tried to talk to her about what had happened with her mom, but she kept brushing it off and saying I shouldn't worry about it. But I could tell she was upset too, and I had no idea how to fix things. That night, after the party had wound down and we were back at her place, things came to a head. We were sitting on the couch, and she turned to me with a serious look on her face. "Why did you say that to my mom?" she asked, her voice tight. I was confused. "What do you mean?" I just told her that I thought it was sweet that you cared about her health. I didn't mean to upset her. Emily let out a frustrated sigh. You don't get it. My mom's been dealing with a lot of stuff lately. She's been feeling really self-conscious about getting older, and it's been hard for her to accept that she can't do everything she used to. She doesn't want anyone, especially me, treating her like she's fragile. She wants to feel in control, and now you've made things worse. I felt my stomach drop. I had no idea. I had been so wrapped up in trying to be funny and avoid confrontation that I hadn't even considered how my words might affect her. Emily continued, I know you didn't mean it that way, but it's not the first time something like this has happened. My mom has been feeling really insecure about her role in the family, and your comment just triggered all those feelings. I was horrified. I never wanted to make her feel like that, let alone her mom. I'm really sorry, I said, I honestly didn't know. I didn't mean to hurt her. Emily softened a little. I know you didn't, but it still hurts. You need to be more careful around my mom. She's not the same person she used to be, and I don't want you to make her feel worse. The rest of the night was tense, but we talked through it. I apologized to Emily's mom the next day, and while it wasn't exactly a heartfelt reconciliation, she accepted my apology with a terse nod. Things have calmed down since then, but I still feel terrible about the whole situation. So, yeah, that was my TIFU. I didn't mean to insult anyone, but I ended up making things a whole lot worse than they needed to be. Hopefully, next time I'm in a similar situation, I'll keep my mouth shut and think before I speak. Family dynamics are complicated, and I learned that the hard way. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.